I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have seen many injustices debated in this House. Just today we've seen the injustice of the Waspy women. In recent weeks we've spoken about the infected blood scandal and more recently the post office scandal. But tonight we're going to debate another scandal. I think is a scandal. It's the Mineworkers pension scheme scandal. Now, 25% of the United Kingdom is on top of an old coal mine, on top of a coal field. So I would have hoped there would have been 25% of this chamber would have been full tonight, but it's not. And maybe there's a few reasons for that. It has been debated a lot in this place, especially before I came here and since I came here. So maybe certain MPs are getting a little bit fed up of saying the same old thing, but we'll keep trying. Now, I started the pit in the mid-80s. I went to work at Sutton Colliery in Nottinghamshire, North Nottinghamshire. I went to work there with my dad, Paul Anderson. He was a rope fitter, and I went to work with him underground, and I had a good time working with my dad and my friends at Sutton Colliery. And Sutton Colliery was a family pit. It was a small coal mine, small coal seams, difficult conditions, family pit where brothers worked with dads, worked with granddads. It was a proper community. But like most coal mines, well, all coal mines, there was tragedy underground. And in Sutton Colliery, in 1957, there was an explosion, a methane explosion, and sadly 5 men lost their lives. And I knew some of the friends and families and descendants of these people that died in 1957, sorry. I then went on to Cresswell Colliery to do my coalface training, another family pit in North Derbyshire, where, again, men work with their sons and brothers work with brothers. Another pit tinged with tragedy. 1950, there was a fire at Cresswell Colliery where 83 men and boys sadly lost their lives. And some of these poor souls, they had to, the mines rescue at the time had to seal the pit off underground to save the colliery, so it could produce coal again. So they sealed some of the old workings off and left the men in by. And because there was no chance of saving them, but just a few months later when they took the stops down, the men was there at the other side of the stops, and some of them had scratched their names into the wall. This is terrible, and this is the sort of thing that's hard to explain to people who's not worked down a coal mine. They're a very tight-knit community, and people working in difficult conditions. I mean, I just had just over 10 years working in awful conditions, but my granddad, Charlie, he had 45 years down the coal mine. He finished up at Norton Colliery. He would have been 50 years, but he took a break between 1940 and 1945 and went to fight Hitler. And then he came back and went straight back down the pit the following week. And when he finished the pit in, I think it was 1979, he got a tankard, a certificate, and 500 quid, and a meagre pension. Imagine that. We knew as miners, when we went down the pit every day, about the risks, the everyday risks that you're going to get underground. I think since mining started in this country in the 1700s, there's over 160,000 men, women and children died in the coal mines. So we knew the risks. We knew there was always a chance that something might happen. But these are the risks we took. And the miners took these risks for just simple reasons, basically, to earn a wage and put food on the table and make sure their kids were well dressed, and that's basically it. But in 1994, when I was still at the pit, it was privatised, and in my area it was Budge Mining that took the pits over, RG Budge Mining. And at this time, a big bone of contention was what was going to happen with the MPS, the Mineworkers pension scheme, probably one of the richest pension schemes at that time in the world, worth like hundreds of millions, if not billions, in today's money. Now, it was always sort of accepted that there would always be a 70-30 split in favour of the miners. Now, when the government sat around the table with the trustees to make this offer to guarantee the Mineworkers pension scheme, we just automatically, surmised it would be 70-30. That would have been a fair split. But at the last minute, and it depends on who you talk to, whether it's the trustees at the time or the mining organisations, the men that's involved in campaigning. Nobody can actually get to the bottom of it, but it ended up being, so they say, a 50-50, take it or leave it deal. And the government at the time never took any proper financial risk assessment, actuarial advice on on the split, and we can never get to the bottom of that. So it was a simple take it or leave it. And when I was working at the pit with my friends, we never really got a say in this, and I can't remember any man that I worked underground with actually being happy with this 50-50 split, because we knew how rich the pension fund was. Now, since 1994, we're 30 years on, and the government have not paid a single penny into the pension scheme. It is a cash cow. By the way, they've taken £4.8 billion out of the scheme, and this is successive governments, both Labour and Conservative governments, have taken billions out of the scheme. Some of these mining groups will say it's nearer to 10 billion, but I'll take the figures I've got here on my paper. Just in the last 3 years, they've taken over £400 million out these surplus. That's a lot of money. This is miners' money. In effect, the guarantee from the government, from the Treasury, is an insurance scheme. They guarantee that if there's not a surplus, they will make up the shortfall and pay the bonuses, etc. But I can't think of any insurance scheme anywhere in this country or in the world that's never had a claim, that's never had to pay out. In 30 years, not one penny has come from the Treasury or the taxpayer to top up the Mineworkers pension scheme. And I think that's a bit of a scandal, and so does my mining community. Now, the 80s and 90s... I will give way.
I'm grateful for the Honourable Member for Ashfield for giving way, but I think we're all agreed. We actually had a debate in this chamber on Thursday, a 3-hour debate with over 30 members contributing, and I think there was unanimity about the unfairness and the injustice of the surplus sharing arrangements. But I'd like to ask a question, in the Honourable Member's former role as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, when the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited the coalfield and spoke in Mansfield, and he gave certain undertakings and assurances to reform the surplus sharing arrangements that the miners would get their money back. Is he, as former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, aware of any discussions after that 2019 general election to implement those promises?
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention. When I was Deputy Chairman, and even before that, I spoke to the current Prime Minister when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and to be fair to the current Prime Minister, he did actually look into the scheme and the surplus arrangements. And one of the discussions at the time was that maybe the whole pension scheme could have been given back to the miners and the government not act as guarantor at all. But I would have hoped that during this debate we could have come together a little bit and not try and politically point score. I'm here for my community of mine workers, I'm here for my dad, I'm here for my brother-in-law, I'm here for the people of Ashfield that toiled underground, and I won't get involved in any silly petty politics during this debate. Now, the 80s and 90s, they were difficult times for the mining community. Pits were closing, people were losing their jobs. And then in the 90s, when the pits were closing and the men were out of work, and we saw the injustice of this surplus arrangement with the government at the time, there were other people trying to rip the miners off. These were the spivs, these were the financial advisors that were rocking up in their new Rovers. They were calling in at miners' welfares, working men's clubs, knocking on doors, turning up. These were men in shiny suits that had never done a day's work in their life, and they were conning the miners. They were telling the mine workers at the time, and my dad was one of them, that their pension pot was no good, that the mine workers' pension was no good, it wasn't making money, and they transferred their money over to these private pension schemes, and they were ripped off. But fortunately, just a few years later, a lot of these miners, including my dad, was able to claim compensation against these sharks and put the money back in the MPS, which is, in my mind, probably one of the best pension schemes in the world. Now, we talk about levelling up in this place a lot, and we stood on a manifesto back in 2019 of levelling up areas. And to be fair to the government, we've had lots of money in Ashfield, but about £200 million in Ashfield itself, with 2 new school rebuilds and nearly £100 in high street funding and towns funding, and extra money for our police and CCTV. So I'm incredibly grateful for that to this government. But real levelling up can come in the form of putting more money into people's pockets and letting them decide how to spend that money. And I can't think, really, of a fairer way of levelling up than giving these miners, their widows, their families, a little bit more money in their pockets. I will give way.
Honourable friend for giving way. I know what a great champion he has been for his community on this issue, the rest of Nottinghamshire, indeed nationally, and I've been in many of those meetings that he described earlier with the Prime Minister when he was Chancellor and with other ministers and so on. And I know my honourable friend was a miner indeed in my constituency in Manton and Bassett Law as well, and he's shown me his lamp many times and told me many stories. But does my honourable friend...
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. I hand back to Mr Anderson, who is giving way. Cool.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The point I would like to make, I think, is we were talking about the split, the surplus. I just wonder if my honourable friend shares my frustration with that, as when we believe that some real progress has actually been made there, whether it's on the split or the surplus, or there has been a chance to renegotiate, to have some incremental progress, put some money back into the pockets of those widows, and whether we could make that change over time, whether we could have been in a better position now if it hadn't have been for those who really don't want to negotiate at all and who wanted all or nothing immediately.
Friend for his intervention. He makes some reasonable points. I think, to be fair, the guarantee scheme has worked in that the government has been able to take more risks with the pension fund. It's created a higher yield. And the problem that I've faced as a Member of Parliament when I've been dealing with certain groups is we cannot get the groups to agree on what is the best solution, the best way forward. It's incredibly frustrating. And there's still a lot of bitterness. We're 40 years on from the miners' strike, and I come from a family that was on strike. All my family were striking miners, but there's still that bitterness now that when I get involved, and sometimes when I met some of the mining groups, they've said, oh, keep your nose out, we don't want scabs getting involved in our business because I come from Nottinghamshire. And that's not the way forward. We've got to have a sensible debate like grown-ups, because at the end of the day, there are thousands of ex-miners dying each year. And this pension fund, now, it's got to be worth, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 billion pounds. It is a massive pot of money. And when the last miner dies, I mean, I'm 57 now. I'm probably one of the last miners, one of the youngest ex-miners left. All that money that's left in the scheme goes to the Treasury. So we could give the miners a much fairer deal, give them that fairer split. Carry out the recommendations of the Bayes 2021 report to give the miners that money. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't cost the government any money at all. Because in 50 years' time, they're going to get a pension fund, a pension pot, worth literally billions and billions of pounds. So like I said before, Madam Deputy Speaker, the way to level up in areas like mine, which are deprived, which have suffered job losses, which have been de-skilled, which have, really gone through the mill over the past 30 or 40 years, is to give the miners and their families a little bit more money. I'm going to close now, but I will say that I feel incredibly proud to stand up here and represent the people of Ashfield and the mining community in Ashfield, the widows, the ex-miners, some of my old friends that I used to work down the pit with. And all we want from the government is a little bit of justice. We're not asking for much. We're just asking for a little bit more money for the miners and their families in this great country of ours before the last miner dies. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm incredibly grateful to be able to speak in this debate. Indeed, the second debate on the miners' pensions in a week, because of course we had a good debate on miners and mining communities last week. And I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for Ashfield, who spoke very passionately about his experience and his family's experience. And he'll know from his first-hand experience, which is shared by many of my constituents, that mining was dirty and dangerous, but it was well respected. And he was absolutely right to speak about how dangerous it was. And indeed, we have a number of memorials across Barnsley where we remember those men who went to work and did not come home. Because in Barnsley, 30,000 men worked down the pit. Our community was built on coal, and our community powered a nation. Now, indeed, it is 40 years since thousands of men were forced to go out on strike to defend their industry, a battle that they sadly lost. But it is simply not right that decades later they are still fighting for their pensions. In 2021, I was pleased to campaign and secure the Bay Select Committee report into the Mineworkers pension scheme. It was a cross-party report, and it very clearly concluded that the government should not be in the business of profiting from miners' pensions. Now, £4.8 billion has been taken by the government to date. That has risen by 400 million since that report. Now, the average miner is on a pension of just £84 a week. Widows are on a lot less. I met a man in my constituency a few weeks ago on simply £1 a week. Now, I've raised this issue in this place dozens of times. I've met with ministers and shadow ministers. I went to the Treasury a few months ago to make the case again. I could not be clearer about my commitment to this issue, and indeed I will continue to advocate not just on miners' pensions, but on miners' health and support for our coalfield communities more broadly. My constituency of Barnsley East is yet to receive any levelling up funding. In 2006, 280,000 miners were in the scheme. The government financial risk to this scheme is in permanent decline, and yet it is costing the same as it did 25 years ago. It's a deal that was done without any actuarial device. That is what the government admitted to me in a written parliamentary question some years ago. Now, I held the last adjournment debate on this subject in 2019, and in that debate I spoke about how 160,000 men claimed a miner's pension. Today, that figure is sadly less than 125,000. We need justice for the miners' pensions before it is too late.
Minister Justin Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I wish to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Ashfield, somebody I've worked very closely with over many, many years, and it is very clear his own personal experience in this area and his long track record has put him in a best position to continue to fight the good fight on behalf of not just his constituents, but this particular sector. And I think I was particularly struck by his willingness to try and engage across the political spectrum, finding time for the Honourable Member for Barnsley East to contribute, who has an impressive track record again at raising this, securing that Bayes debate and other debates for former ministers to respond to. And whilst I am only freshly returned as a minister, in those mere whirlwind of 3 weeks, I have been lobbied by many people on this subject, including my honourable friends for Bolsover, Mansfield, Bassetlaw, Sedgefield, and I know the honourable member for Easington has been filling in my PQ response rates. And so I do recognise the importance of this scheme, the strong feelings around the different options that have been considered and could be considered, and of course.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. It's been very generous and, completely in character. I don't think any of us want a pat on the back. What we want is the issue resolved. And like the debate we had before on Waspy, the issue is the age demographic. My poor mother's 88. There are many minors and widows who are, coming to the end. We need to resolve this in the interests of justice. And the Bay Select Committee report from the 27th of April 2021 gives us that opportunity.
And I thank the honourable member, and as I said, I recognise the strength of feeling, and I want to set out the position of the government and where there are perhaps opportunities to look further. But it is right, to start with, that we acknowledge the hard work of coal miners over decades and their contribution to national prosperity, which is exactly what the honourable member for Ashfield did so well. Since privatisation, the government has recognised the need to support former coalfield areas through the initiatives such as the Coalfield Regeneration Trust. Over the last 25 years, successive governments have invested over £1 billion in former coalfield areas. For example, the UK government is committed to levelling up across the whole of the United Kingdom to ensure that no community is left behind, and investing in places that need it most, including former coalfield communities. And I again credit the honourable member for how hard he worked on securing the significant levelling up funds that have reached his constituency.
Well, I'm grateful, and I don't mean to be a nuisance, I promise. But all very well for Ashfield, that have had 200 or 300 million. Easington has had nothing. And my community of Horden, that was in the levelling up bid, is in the 1% most deprived communities in the country. And I hope the Minister isn't suggesting that £4.8 billion of the miners' money can legitimately be used by government for other purposes, like regeneration in Coalfield or other areas. That's their money. If the Reserve Investment Fund alone was redistributed, it would give them almost £900 a month in their pockets directly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm the honourable member is never a nuisance. But again, I would reflect on the ability to lobby and secure levelling up funds, and those that do well are benefiting directly their communities. And specifically, this involves a range of projects, including the £20 million to deliver 2 capital regeneration projects that will revitalise town centres, including in Ashfield. Now, the Coal Authority has been working with public and private sector partners for a number of years to develop the use of heat in water contained in the former coal mining infrastructure as a resource for heat networks on large space heating. Current schemes are heating multiple homes and businesses at discounts of at least 5% below prevailing market rates for heat. And the Coal Authority estimates that 25% of properties are located on former coal mining areas. Mine water heat can offer a homegrown and sustainable source of heat, boost local economies and also create more local green jobs. The government's commitment to mining communities is also demonstrated through the continued guarantee given to the Mineworkers pension scheme. Now, the Mineworkers pension scheme remains a significant undertaking. It has over 130,000 members, pays pensions at an annual cost of over £600 million and has assets in excess of £7 billion. The scheme is managed by the trustees. The government's role is as a guarantor. And my officials meet the trustees to discuss the operation of the scheme regularly. When the scheme was set up in 1952, members contributed no more than 20 pence per week and benefits were relatively small. From 1975, contributions and benefits were linked to member salary. British Coal made up the difference. At privatisation, the government took on the guarantor role previously played by British Coal. The scheme had a surplus in 1994 and 50% of this surplus was used to enhance members' pensions immediately.
I mean, I'm grateful. That's an interesting chronology. But can you just inform the House when the government stopped paying into the scheme? There was a substantial increase when superannuation came in 1974, matched by British Coal. But isn't it correct that after 1984, the government made no contribution, took a contribution holiday?
My members, the honourable member's passion to speed ahead I just urge him just to be a little bit more patient. We are exploring all of these points and I am getting to them. Fear not. So it was used with the other 50% being payable to the guarantor. The government of the day agreed to leave its share of surpluses in the scheme as the investment reserve. This acts against the buffer against a future deficit. Now, the arrangements for sharing scheme surpluses were agreed between the trustees and the government in its role as guarantor to the Mineworkers pension scheme in 1994. At that time, all parties believed the equal sharing of surplus to be a fair agreement. Now, that predates all of us. The guarantee ensures that a member's guaranteed pension, including inflation increases, will always be paid, and a member's total pension, including bonus pension, will not fall in cash terms. Now, the scheme has been a success, and to its credit of the scheme trustees, they have invested in such a way to enable those returns. And we know as politicians that decisions on pensions and pension reserves aren't always as successful as this. But the guarantee is key to making higher returns possible. Without the guarantee, the trustees would have to invest far more cautiously so as to avoid losing money and risk being unable to meet scheme obligations. And in a former role in DWP, I have also been responding to debates where pension schemes have failed. And we cannot lose sight of that. We have seen this scenario with many other pension schemes. Few equivalent schemes have been able to generate surpluses, and fewer still are able to use those surpluses to improve member benefits. The presence of the guarantee allows the trustees to invest in a way that targets high returns and generates bonuses for members. The trustees acknowledge the importance of the guarantee and the ability to generate bonuses that it creates. The scheme website itself states that typical members' pension today is around 33% higher in real terms than it would have been had they received only their actual earned pension up to privatisation. And I welcome this success and believe that it would be unwise to tamper with such a fruitful arrangement. Now, I acknowledge the 2021 Select Committee report and its recommendations. However, like my predecessors, I cannot agree to implement them. This is a question of balance, and I recognise that there are strongly held and different viewpoints on this. But like the trustees, the government recognises the importance of the guarantee and is committed to it. All scheme members will continue to receive their full pension entitlement, and that commitment is unwavering. Implementing the report's recommendations would shift the balance of the risk to the taxpayer in a way that the government considers would be disproportionate. The Minister at the time of the report met the trustees following the publication of the report to hear their views. She set out that any changes to the surplus sharing arrangements would need trustees' agreement to give up the guarantee, which the trustees declined. The Minister then invited the trustees to put forward any further proposals for changes to surplus sharing, emphasising the guarantee would need to form part of any discussions. But to date, none have been received. The government, though, has agreed some scheme changes, including additional protections for bonus pensions and to mitigate potential unfair impacts of recent inflation changes, and is open to further suggestions. And I stress this. Yes.
I'm grateful. I was pleased to work with the trustees and the Minister, the then Minister, on that issue around the bonuses. I appreciate the arguments he's making, and no one is underestimating how important the guarantee is. But does he acknowledge that members of the Miners' Pension Scheme have paid £4.8 billion for that guarantee to date?
Absolutely. But it also recognises nobody knew how this could go when the deal was struck. At the time that the deal was struck, it was deemed to be a fair deal. But like many other pension schemes, it could as easily have gone the other way. And we would now not be having a debate to say, well, we need to excuse the taxpayers. It was a fair deal at the time, and we're seeking to make sure that it continues to over-deliver. However, yeah, of course.
It was a fair deal at the time. I can assure the Minister that I was working down the pit at the time, and nobody I worked with actually thought it was a fair deal. We thought it was a deal that was forced upon the trustees at the time. It was a take it or leave it. It's been proved not to be a fair deal. And like I said during my speech, when the last miner dies, billions of pounds goes to the Treasury, and we've received a 50% surplus in return for that. Does the Minister think that's fair? Yes or no?
Minister.
But the challenge is that's a presumption that the investments continue to return at the rates that they could. They could as easily go the other way, which is why I suspect the trustees were reluctant to release the guarantee. However, and to be clear, I remain open to exploring options for improvements to the scheme and would welcome any suggestions that the trustees wish to make. The door is firmly open. Madam Deputy Speaker, future outcomes are not known. Any market volatility going forward could impact on the future scheme valuations, and the guarantee will provide even greater value should market conditions make it harder to generate returns. If there is a deficit in the future, members will still see their guaranteed pensions increase by RPI, and will continue to receive bonus pensions to ensure that their total pension does not fall in cash terms. If the investment reserve that the government leaves in the scheme to act as a buffer is exhausted, funds from the government will be found to ensure payments continue to be made to scheme members. And to be absolutely clear, that is from the government, and our commitment is unwavering.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.